Hi everyone, I'm Julia with the Berkeley Judicial Institute, back with another installment of Judges in the Community. Today we're joined by Judge Ginger Lerner-Wren, here to share how she pioneered the first specialized mental health court in the United States. Good morning, Judge Lerner-Wren. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be here. I can't wait to dive into your journey and insights, but just to start out, would you mind briefly sharing more about who you are, where you sit, and your personal judicial history?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Julia, I just wanted to say what an absolute thrill, an honor to be now part of the Berkeley Judicial Institute community. And it's just really wonderful. So for your viewers, first of all, I am a county court criminal judge. I actually have a pretty strange, unique. I'll use the word, I think, actually unique. Professional trajectory. I began my career when I graduated law school. I really wanted to go into public, service and that area, but it was during the recession and there weren't a whole lot of public interest slots. And ultimately, though, I did get a position that no longer exists called the Office of Public Guardian. And I did public guardianship work for the 17th Judicial Circuit. And for your listeners and viewers, I do sit in the state of Florida. I am in the city of Fort Lauderdale, which for a lot of your viewers is about 45 minutes or so north of Miami. Most people know where Miami is. And I am a county court judge. I've been on the bench now for almost 30 years. It's really hard to believe. And like I was saying, when I came to you know, practicing law, I started first of all in the Office of Public Guardian, which really I gave me some really wonderful advocacy skills and skills to collaborate with different community organizations. And most of my um, clients, if you will, most of them were older adults. They were indigent, and they just didn't have any family that could serve as their legal guardian. So I was their legal guardian. I worked with social workers within my office, and I took my own caseload, if you will, so I could expand my service model because we didn't have a whole lot of money in our budget. But nonetheless, as I was doing this work, I took a lot of my clients were residents of South Florida State Hospital, which is to this day our largest psychiatric institution in the state of Florida. It covers almost half of the state. And back then, South Florida State Hospital was really not a very therapeutic place. And so, as I would go visit my clients there, and it was really rather overwhelming at times, I one day attended a legislative forum over at the hospital, and the governor at the time in the state of Florida was threatening to close the hospital. And I got up and I talked about the need, the really compelling need to keep the hospital open, because for a lot of our residents, there was no other place to go. We didn't have a community-based system of care for people with serious mental illness in South Florida. And I just don't know what would have happened to those individuals. And at the time, one of the individuals that heard me speak was the director of what's now known as Florida disability rights. And I got a call basically one Friday afternoon from a lawyer friend of mine saying, "Hey Ginger, listen, I got a call that there's a new, very responsible mental health position coming open, and there's a person who thinks you'd be a really good fit." And I said, "Oh, really? Well, what is the position?" And they said, "Well, we can't tell you that." And I said, "Okay, well, who was it?" And he goes, I can't tell you that either, but are you interested?" And I said, I am absolutely interested after my experience, working with, my clients and trying to help, their families in any way I could. And sure enough, the position was I was now going to be the plaintiff's monitor for the federal class action of Sanborn versus Childs, that had been going on for many, many years. And through that position, I was given very special training by various and diverse experts in the field from all over the United States. And I really gained just incredible knowledge base in terms of systems of care in the mental health space and disability rights, consumer rights, recovery, just across all these disciplines. And I held that position for about a year and a half. And like any plaintiff's monitor, I guess it sort of comes with a shelf life. And it felt like it was time for me to go. I decided to run for election for a county court judge in 1996. And I ran for office with adorable Ice Spice Little Debbie gingerbread cookies. And I think that led me to victory. And I have been a county court judge now since 1997. And when I got to the bench, our criminal justice and jail system was experiencing significant problems. Problems in jail overcrowding, problems in not knowing how to respond to people being arrested with mental illnesses and co occurring disorders, of course. And there were many suicides taking place in the jail. And a lot of the criminal justice stakeholders got together and trying to problem solve. And they said basically, we did have a specialized drug court. Our first drug court in the state of Florida was down in Miami during the opioid crisis, the cocaine crisis. And so we knew that there was a specialized drug court, treatment court in Miami. And so the recommendation was, well, we need to create a specialized mental health court. And they knew I was there. They knew I had specialized training. And within 4 months from coming onto the bench, I got the call from the chief judge that congratulations, Ginger, you're our new mental health court judge. When do you want to start? And to tell you the truth, Julia, he was a very conservative judge. I actually thought, I'm thinking maybe he'll change his mind. And I said, if you can just give me 10 days, 10 days. And sure enough, I was able to work with our public defender's office and our state attorney's office and all agencies across our community. And we were able, without any grants, without any funding, to develop a diversionary mental health court, which would basically use the court like a funnel to take people out of an inappropriate system of care, that being a jail, to a more appropriate system of care, that being hospitals or mental health residential programs or services in the community.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I know you kind of expanded on how this mental health court came to be and how this, project or work kind of began. I'm curious how then now that this has been going on for such a long time, how your engagement or execution of this work has evolved over time. Has there been any roadblocks or changes or inspirations along the way? If you could tell us a little bit more about how these efforts around mental health has grown to what it is today.
Thank you so much. First of all, I think that the development, the evolution of the court, I really borrowed from legal scholarship that had emerged out of the University of Miami Law School. Two incredible scholars, incredible law professors, Professor Winnick, for example, and he was so incredible and came up with the concept of therapeutic jurisprudence. That the idea being that if taking procedural justice along with TJ, we call it TJ in the field, that if people that you're serving, whether it be in a specialized treatment court or in a regular criminal court or whatever civil court, whatever it may be that a judge is serving in, that if people feel that they have been heard, if they feel that they're being treated with respect, if they feel that they've been treated with dignity, that we're more, um, the individuals subject to the court are more likely than not to accept and adhere to the court's, orders or decisions, even if they may not agree. So this dignity focus of mental health court to me was really the top of the pyramid in terms of importance. That everything I realized that everything I said in court, everything I did in court, everything the lawyers, how they would behave in court, everything had to be grounded in dignity. And I think from a TJ vantage point, that has been, I think, the most important cornerstone of the work, that I have done, that I continue to do. I actually have and had two criminal divisions. The mental health court was technically a subdivision of my regular county court criminal court. So that's every criminal matter with incarceration up to 1 year. That's the county court. And so over time, both of the approaches in one court, in the mental health court, became the approach in my court of general jurisdiction as well. And I think that I know I hear input from so many lawyers in the community that they just love practicing, in this courtroom because it feels good. It empowers them, um, to be able to promote compassion and empathy, right? And it's just been, I think, being on the bench, and we did have a recent rotation in the mental health court, so I'm not presiding over that court specifically anymore, but still we know the prevalence of mental illness, for example, is 1 in 5, and I still do my same mental health work in my regular division as I always have. And I just think it's just been an extraordinary way, quite frankly, to preside over a courtroom.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear, and just creating that space, as you said, with lawyers and also just individuals who are, in within the legal system, like providing a space that could rather be daunting and a bit uncomfortable, or yeah, a place that that one doesn't feel as comfortable in, and really including those aspects of mental health and, as you said, the literature and studies behind it that support this environment is really special and I believe is really needed across the nation. And so I really appreciate you being that pioneer, being that front runner of sharing this experience with others. And I know you kind of touched upon this, but when you reflect on the experience of affected individuals themselves, are there any stories or moments in particular that kind of stand out or speak to the impact that you have, that you make on your community?
That's such a great question, Julia. Give me one second. I'm going to turn my back. As a matter of fact, I have a book. I am an author. And I'll just hold it up. I'm not trying to plug, but this is my book, A Court of Refuge, Stories from the Bench of America's First Mental Health Court, published by Beacon Press in 2018. And it contains all different vignettes, if you will, that we've gone through in the courtroom, and it feels much like really reading a play, if you will. But for example, there was, and oh, I just want to add a couple of things for your listeners and viewers and other judges. I'm also a longtime adjunct professor for Nova Southeastern University. I teach a doctoral program in criminal justice and therapeutic jurisprudence, as well as a master's class in forensic psychology. And so over the years, there's been so many. I've also taken the court and integrated suicide prevention. Within the court process, I do sit on the executive committee of the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, which is the national umbrella group of all other suicide prevention organizations in the United States. And I think that one vignette that always kind of, I don't know, it just touches my heart, is that one day in court, I was between dockets, and my court deputy came into the my office and said, Judge, there's somebody sitting alone in the courtroom. And he basically said, I don't know if he's early for one division or late for another. So I said, let me come down and let me go into the courtroom and let's speak with him. And sure enough, I noticed that when I went to go over to talk to him, he had his head down on his arm, leaning on top of the pews in the courtroom. And I sat next to him and I said, Sir, what are you okay? What's going on? Are you here for court? And he said, and he starts crying. And he said, I just don't know what to do. I have court and I don't know what to do. I lost my job. I'm an accountant and I just can't find work. I am afraid that I'm going to lose my home. I don't know what to tell my family. He was so distraught that I asked him directly, Julia, are you thinking about harming yourself? And he said he was. And so we called over. We're very fortunate in Broward County. We do have a mobile crisis team with Henderson Behavioral Health Center that if you call, they'll come to the courtroom. And we got them there. He went with them to get him to a hospital. And, sure enough, maybe about 4 months later, I'm doing my regular criminal docket. And all of a sudden, I see him. And he kind of looks familiar. And then I look at the name and I said, oh my gosh, is that you? I go, you look amazing. And I could cry. I do. I get a little weepy. And he said, Judge, he goes, I just can't thank you enough. He goes, I just don't know what would have happened to me. if I didn't get into your courtroom. And, I think there's so many stories like that, and also that bring that dignity to bear. I know that at one point I was working with Dr. Lenore Walker, who is the pioneer of the battered woman syndrome. And she works and she lives in Broward County and is one of my dear friends. And we were trying to see if we could actually create a separate woman's docket, so we could be gender based, and focused on trauma, with regards to women and everything that they've experienced through domestic violence and so forth, and you know victimization. And at one point we did that. We were able to get a grant for a specialized women's treatment program not too far from the courthouse. And one day, for another vignette, there was a woman sitting right in the jury box where the prisoners would be, closest to the bench, and she was just hysterical, crying. And I asked her, what's going on, what's happening, how could I help you? And all of a sudden, she is weeping. She takes her legs and her ankles are shackled, and she puts them on top of the jury bar and hangs them over the jury box, and just goes on and on in terms of the shame, how ashamed she is that she's in shackles, how ashamed she is that she got arrested. And on, she went. And of course, I let her go. And finally, I was able to interject and say, listen, you have no idea how common victimization and trauma is for young girls and women in the criminal justice system. And went on to talk about, some of that prevalence, and that recovery is real, and that treatment works. And before you knew it, she lifts her legs back, sits up straight, and says, yes, Judge, I would love to work in your court. And, these are the stories that just flourish, in the courtroom when judges feel confident enough, to also be vulnerable, right? Along with the people that you're serving, and then have a menu, if you will, of interventions that they could offer in terms of treatment programs, this, that, maybe they're homeless, in terms of service for the people that we see.
Yeah, and I know we just heard, these amazing transformative stories about those who were affected and involved in the mental health courts. But I kind of want to shift the spotlight onto you and ask, how has your work in this mental health space, at the intersection of, the judiciary, how has this had a personal impact on your involvement or in your work and as a judge and as an individual?
I just think that's such a great question. And I just can't imagine, I'm nearing 30 years on the bench, got a few more to go. um, but I just can't imagine a more fulfilling, um, position, given the work, that I've done that's influenced not only my community, but communities all over the world. And there's mental health courts now, internationally, nationally. There's all kinds of collaborative problem solving treatment courts now, in the United States and abroad. And I think that for judges, it gives not just me, but for all of us that engage in this work. And I think I could speak for them to a large extent that, I mean, just the amazing opportunity to of reach to help people, that your court can be a therapeutic court, that you can be an agent of change from the bench. And I don't know, it's just so gratifying, Julia, rather than just call balls and strikes, you know.
Yeah, that's amazing. And for the last question, I'm interested in for those who are aspiring or interested or, influenced by, what you have said so far and starting the kind of work that you do. I would love to know what it takes to prepare, take action, maybe any expert tricks for those who want to get involved in such work.
I think that's a beautiful question. I really do. And I would what I would tell other judges is follow your passion. You know, follow your passion. You know, some judges just love working with children, right? And want to get involved in dependency. There's one judge, a circuit judge in our jurisdiction who um does dependency work, and he got really involved. There's a Seminole tribal reservation that sits not very far from the courthouse in Hollywood, Florida. And he decided from his own passionate idea, you know what? I'm not going to ask them to come to me. I am going to take my dependency court and I'm going to do it on the reservation. And, you know, from a cultural vantage point, I can't think of anything, you know, more inspiring, you know, than to honor, you know, our Seminole tribal members' families and take the work there so that all the elders could be around, right? And their culture could really, you know, emerge. And I really think following your passion and then, you know, any way you can find, like what I did when I was public guardian, I didn't really know how to be a public guardian. And I called a public guardian out of Miami-Dade County, didn't know him. I said, listen, I just got appointed. I said, is there any way maybe I could come and spend some time with you? And you could maybe, you know, share how your office operates. And he said, I would love to have you. And I came down to Miami and met with him, and he really, really, you know, gave me some incredible guidance in terms of this work. And I think people are very generous, that you could find mentors and all of that.
That's great to hear, and I hope that people, try to go out and follow their passions and make an impact on the community because I know that means so much for our, our communities and also for our future generations. And so I really appreciate you sharing your amazing work with the community around critical issues of mental health and criminal justice, both in Broward County and beyond on a national scale. So thank you so much. And with that, as the member of the Berkeley Judicial Institute, I want to thank you, Judge Lerner-Wren, again so much for your amazing insights.